right, folks, welcome in to Pickaxe and Roll, brought to you by our good friends over at Superbook Sports. I'm your host, Ryan Blackburn, at NBA Blackburn on Twitter, part of the Mile High Sports Podcast Network, and I am here to help recap the 2023 NBA Draft for your Denver Nuggets as they make 3 picks in this draft, and I think a little bit of a surprise for sure in terms of the kinds of players that they were targeting, in terms of what they actually went for. I think they went lower on many people's overall big boards so that they could get the fits that they were hoping for and get players that they believe can contribute going forward in the coming years. Maybe not later down the line, but sooner rather than later. You can definitely see that with a lot of these guys. Got some information on each of these players, and we'll be able to talk about that for sure. But really looking forward to being able to hang out with all of you. Thank you so much for sticking around. Let's get into this. Let's talk about what's going down with this Nuggets team. And after multiple trades that ended up being one big trade during there was one that was consummated during the finals, but it actually wasn't finalized. Denver then folded that trade along with another reported trade with the Indiana Pacers into a 4-team deal that then had them basically send. Here's the actual math on what happened. They sent out the 40th pick and a 2029 first-round pick for the 29th pick this year, the 32nd pick this year, the 37th pick this year, and a 2024 second-round pick. So that's what you're looking at if you are a Nuggets fan. You're getting basically 1 late first-rounder and then 3 relatively early second-rounders. I think the 2024 pick should be pretty good too, in return for a mid-second-round pick this year and a 2029 first 6 years down the road. So the Nuggets basically, over the course of these last couple months, have pushed their assets up to the front. They've tried to get these cheaper contracts, these younger guys, into the building as soon as possible. They don't plan on making any big trades with the 2029 first-round pick. And I'm not surprised by that. I think they feel very confident about the core that they've assembled with this team. And instead of going with or saving that ammo trying to trade for somebody else, they believe in their group. So they're going to bolster the group. And with Nikola Jokic, Jamal Murray, and even Michael Porter Jr., Aaron Gordon, you feel very confident about the direction of this team going forward. So the Nuggets are adding to that. Last year, they added defenders. Last year, they added perimeter defenders, versatile pieces, Christian Brown, Peyton Watson, both of those guys. You feel pretty good about where they're going to be, especially Christian Brown, in these coming months, in these coming years. But one of the things that I've been thinking about with the draft and not necessarily knowing what it would ultimately turn into was what kinds of players would they add to Christian Brown and Peyton Watson? Are they going to try to get more defenders? Are they just going to bolster that? Are they going to get a point guard? Are they going to get a center? How are they going to handle this stuff? And instead of they went more offensive centric rather than the defensive centric that I thought they might be doing. The first pick that they made was Julian Strawther, who is a Gonzaga player, 3-year player at Gonzaga, and a really, really interesting prospect. He was not on my list of 10 names that I thought Denver would go with because he was the 11th name. I know I tweeted this out last night. I know that sounds like cap. It's not, I promise. I was debating whether to put Julian Strawther on there or Cason Wallace. As it turns out, Cason Wallace gets drafted 10th overall way sooner than I thought he would. I thought he'd go 20th. If he was at 20, I thought Denver could have a chance to trade up for him. As it stands, they don't, and they go with Julian Strawther instead, who is a offensive, sharpshooting wing forward, definitely a true small forward in a lot of ways, but he is going to be Denver's offensive bench guy. They could have gone with a variety of different options. They could have gone with a more traditional point guard type, and they found somebody like that in Jalen Pickett, who we'll talk about very soon. But I do like the idea of Julian Strawther. I do like the idea of a versatile wing, somebody who can get their shot in many different ways and is comfortable shooting the basketball. He should be very, very interesting. This last year for Gonzaga, he started all 37 games that he played, averaged 31 minutes a night, 15 points, 6 rebounds, 1.3 assists. Not the greatest passer, but he can be functional. Uh, and then he shot 47% from the field and nearly 41% from three on 5.3 attempts per game. He was in a pro style offense at Gonzaga. One of the things about their team was they have Drew Timme, who is a very he's a clear college big man who has a lot of the same skill sets for the college level that Nikola Jokic has for the NBA level. They run a lot of post ups, they run a lot of passing. And then what people kind of forget is that the previous season, they also had Chet Holmgren. So they ran a lot of that double big offense. They ran a lot of interior sets, and they had guys like Strawther, guys like Jalen Suggs, Joel Ayayi, who I liked in the previous years. They've had a lot of guys go through Gonzaga that are really talented pieces and also pro-ready pieces in a lot of different ways. Strawther is a wing version of a lot of those guys, and I like him for a variety of reasons. But the most important one is that he can operate in a movement system. He can operate as a catch and shoot guy. He can operate as a DHO guy. And I think that there are going to be ways that Denver can utilize him off their bench where Jokic kind of props him up in a lot of different ways. Jokic looks really good with players that can space the floor for him. And as long as Strawther is staying connected, as long as he's playing the right way, I think that he has a lot of potential to be one of the featured offensive pieces off that bench. Now, whether that's what happens quickly, whether that's what happens over the course of a couple of years, we don't know. That's up to Strawther in a lot of different ways. And it's up to Michael Malone and then the Nuggets coaching staff to help develop him a little bit. But I do like what he provides. I think that there's a nice wrinkle there. And I talked about this with CT Fazio on my draft preview podcast, where he is a player on the wing that is very offensive centric. He's not a good defender. He's going to struggle on that end. There's going to be some time to get up to speed on that end for sure. When it comes to, man, you really need a lot of help trying to figure this stuff out. He also needs to get stronger. He also needs to get more engaged on that end. There's some things that the Nuggets are going to need to work with him on. But the shooting is the shooting, and he's very, very talented. He has a great floater. That's something that I think Nuggets fans are going to be pretty happy with. There's going to be a lot there, and he can be the offensive version of what a Christian Braun or Peyton Watson do on the wing. You can also see lineups where all three of those guys play off the bench. Maybe they have a point guard there. Maybe it's Jamal Murray. Maybe one of your most common lineups next year is Jamal Murray, Christian Braun, Peyton Watson, Julian Strawther, and a backup big man, whether it's Zeke Naji or maybe they bring back Thomas Bryant or they had Jeff Green back or something like that. There are some things that Denver can do from a versatility perspective that Strawther, I think, was going to help them with. So that should be a good one. He's the guy that I think Nuggets fans should be most excited for. First round pick, so he gets that guaranteed contract, one of the lower salary slots in the draft, of course, being at 29. But he's going to be a guaranteed contract, and we're going to see what he provides. Do I expect him to play immediately? No, I don't. I think that there's going to be a lot of push for Denver to bring back veterans. There's going to be a lot of guys that the Nuggets hope to bring back with the hopes that they don't have to rely on too many young guys at the same time. But Strawther, I think, has the most potential to play immediately for Denver just because he brings an elite skill, and that's an important skill to have. Bench shooting, like, come on now. Jalen Pickett goes 32nd in this draft, and he was, I think, like, actually both he and Hunter Tyson, I think, were curious picks. Strawther, I was more regretting because I wanted to write about him and ultimately just kept it to 10 names that I was going to write about. But Jalen Pickett's interesting. He's a 5-year player at both Siena and then ultimately Penn State. New York point guard, somebody that I think Michael Malone is going to really like. He's going to be very interested in. Those guys will connect for sure. And one of the interesting, like there's several interesting things about Jalen Pickett's game. Not necessarily the highest ceiling guy because he's not a great athlete, and neither is Strawther, by the way. That's one thing where you look at the combine results, the combine measurements for these guys. Neither of them test very well athletically, and that's I think a break away from what Denver added in the draft this last year. So that's something that was pretty clearly not a point of emphasis in this particular draft. But Pickett, he provides an interesting, unique skill set in how very heavily he rebounds. He's like the fewest rebounds he's averaged as a point guard in college so far in his career is 4.3. This last year, he averaged 7.4 rebounds per game, and he also averaged 6.6 assists. He was fifth in the fifth in the Big Ten in total rebounds for Penn State, and he was first in total assists. I thought that was crazy. I thought that that's a crazy number for a 6'4" point guard who's 6'2" in shoes. He's a guy who a little bit of a throwback kind of player. I've heard others talk about him, whether it's Mark Jackson or Andre Miller or players like that are very big, that are patient. I kind of see a little bit of Jamal Murray in the way that he tries to get guys in jail, tries to get guys on his back in order to create space for passes and shots. Also uses the post really well, which is something that Jamal has wanted to do. And he's very much a bully. He's very much a bully against guys that he believes he's stronger than, that he can create space against. And there are certain styles that translate to the NBA that I think not a lot of people think about. One guy that he also reminded me of was Jalen Brunson, and the way that he would crab dribble, the way that he would protect the ball while he's driving into the paint and just create these little pockets of space that he could take advantage of with elite finishing levels. And Jalen Pickett's an elite finisher. He shot nearly 51% from the field in his senior season. And that's just incredibly impressive and deserves a lot of credit for being able to do that at just 6'4". I don't know what his role is in the NBA, though, because he's not a traditional point guard. He's not somebody who's going to be a runner of pick and roll all the time. Not really a pull-up three-point threat or anything like that. His shot is a little flat, not necessarily the best shooter. And like Strawther, he's not a great athlete. So you are probably going to be relying upon him for like backup point guard minutes, things like that. But he's definitely going to be a guy, if you're the Nuggets, that you're going to have to account for defensively. He's not necessarily going to be this elite, awesome defender. That could be wrong, and maybe that ends up proving to be wrong as he continues to develop and get better and get smarter. That's one thing that you really hear about him, though, is that he's just a really, really smart player. So if you're a Nuggets fan, that's another thing that you're looking at with some of these guys. Just a very large emphasis on smart, high IQ basketball that they're trying to bring in as soon as possible so that they can play these guys if they need to. Whether they're actually good, whether they actually do play, we will see. But I do think that Jalen Pickett's just going to be one of those guys that third point guard for Denver in all likelihood. I don't think he's going to be the primary backup, but third point guard for Denver where if he has to play, you feel okay about it. Not going to be the biggest deal. And finally, Hunter Tyson, Clemson guy, goes 37th overall for Denver. And he's one of those players that rose up the draft boards a little bit, especially with a combine performance that apparently he showed out pretty well at the combine, did some things athletically and as a shooter that I don't think a lot of people were expecting. And when you watch him shoot, and it's something that I saw his profile, I saw what people were saying about him, and I was like, okay, this is whatever. And then you actually watch him shoot, and it's pretty impressive. Like I was pretty impressed with some of the shots that he takes. They're deep. He has different ways that he can get into his outside shot. He is going to be, I think, your prototypical 6'8", 6'9", stretch four, somebody who probably not athletic enough or big enough or strong enough to play the five, probably not quick enough to play the three. He's going to be your prototypical stretch four, which is something that not a lot of teams have anymore. Like, it's actually frowned upon in a lot of ways to go with the stretch four. You usually have a 6'7" guy who could play the three, then moves over to the four in a lot of different lineups. So Hunter Tyson, a little bit slower than those guys, probably needs to improve on his athleticism for sure. That's the first thing that really stands out to me when watching him operate. I don't see a lot of burst from him, and I don't see a lot of physicality from him that is going to be super helpful in an NBA concept. Like, he's going to be overwhelmed on both ends of the floor in a lot of different ways, and the Nuggets are going to have to help him on that. They're going to have to improve with Hunter Tyson. Like, he's going to have to get into a strength and conditioning program at the NBA level. That's going to take some time, and as long as he can develop relatively quickly, then maybe this isn't a year one pick. But he's definitely not somebody that I'm thinking about contributing immediately. I don't know whether these guys are going to, whether it's Tyson or Pickett, I don't know whether they're going to be full-time contracts or two-way contracts. But if I had to bet on it, I would say that Tyson is the more likely two-way and Pickett is the more likely full-time contract, just because Denver's going to need full-time players at the point guard position for sure. But we're going to see. We're going to see what it looks like. What I do think, though, is that Tyson, not somebody that I really expected to be on Denver's radar. I thought that they would probably have gone with a little bit more of a defensive guy at this spot, but not the biggest deal. If you believe that he can shoot, if you believe that he's a 40% three-point shooter, who actually was a strong rebounder at the college level as well, led the entire ACC in rebounding at the defensive rebounding side, then you have something there. He is a little bit like he still needs to build up strength, still needs to build up maybe some toughness a little bit. But I do think that he kind of, like, I was listening to the DNVR show, kind of reminds them of Tyler Lydon and has that very similar look with the orange jersey. I hope he's not Tyler Lydon for everybody's sake. But there's a difference between drafting Hunter Tyson as your first pick and your only pick in a first round versus drafting him 37th overall. Maybe he works out. And if he is a 40% three-point shooter with good rebounding, there's a role for that. Like, we've watched Georges Niang, who is not an athletic dude, carve out a role in the NBA and a helpful player in an NBA context. Maybe not the greatest playoff player, but could definitely help in the regular season. So we will see what it looks like, but those are the three guys that Denver drafted. When we come back, I'm going to talk about how this draft class kind of affects the rest of their offseason by looking into the depth chart and some of the free agents that the Nuggets currently have on their roster. But first, everybody, we're changing the game. Help your bets stay hot this summer at Superbook Sports, the most trusted name in sports gambling with a direct line to Las Vegas. And now you can use promo code MILEHIGH to score up to $250 with their first bet bonus. Win or lose, Superbook will match your first bet up to $250 with promo code MILEHIGH. Download the Superbook Sports app, enter the promo code MILEHIGh, and you'll get $250 courtesy of Superbook Sports. Visit superbook.com for terms and conditions. Gambling problem, call 1-800-522-4700. We'll be right back on Pickaxe and Roll. And we're back. Pickaxe and Roll, Ryan Blackburn here. Thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in. Appreciate all the love and support on the podcast. If you can, drop a like on the video if you're watching along on YouTube. If you are watching or if you're listening on the audio side, make sure to rate, review, and subscribe if you can on those avenues. And also just sharing out the pod definitely helps, especially for this NBA draft recap kind of podcast. Should be very interesting to see where Denver goes from here. But now let's talk about it. Let's talk about how the Nuggets draft affects Denver's offseason, because I don't think a lot of people really expected Denver to – I don't really think a lot of people expected Denver to add a bunch of guys in the draft that they would actually compete for minutes. And we'll see whether these guys actually compete for minutes. I think that Strawther's the most likely, but I think what you're mostly doing is filling out the end of the bench. And for that reason, Denver's going to have to bolster the rest of their lineups, bolster the rest of their depth chart. Here's what it looks like. The point guard depth chart. Here's what that looks like for Denver right now. You've got Jamal Murray, Jalen Pickett, and maybe Colin Gillespie. This is because Reggie Jackson is a free agent. Bruce Brown obviously is a free agent. He played backup point guard in the playoffs for Denver. And Ish Smith is a free agent. So Denver still has some holes to fill here, and we don't know which of those guys they're actually going to bring back. But Pickett makes some sense to provide some stability at the back end. If you do bring back Colin Gillespie and you decide we are going to have those guys compete for backup point guard minutes, I don't think that that's the right call. I think that Denver needs a better backup point guard than that, at least at the outset. So I would expect Denver to continue to add a vet. I would expect them to make that a priority. It would shock me if Denver went into the regular season with this particular group, this particular trio as their primary point guards, because Murray, you don't want him to play a whole bunch of minutes the entire time. You want him to be rested and refreshed for another playoff run, hopefully another deep playoff run. So he carries a lot of burden already. You want somebody that can help kind of share that a little bit, especially when Murray can also slide to the 2, and you can have potentially another point guard out there that can carry the load in a lot of different ways. So we will see what it looks like. But for that reason, I would guess that Denver adds to this group in the offseason. Shooting guard, pretty barren right now. You have KCP and Christian Brown. Those two guys are going to play. Like, that's going to be your primary duo right there. But if you don't bring back Bruce Brown, then you're going to have to add at least a little bit more depth at that end. I do think that Strawther might be able to move up and play some 2, although I think one of his biggest weaknesses, Strawther, and the reason why I have him at small forward, is because he kind of struggles to stay in front of the quick twitch guys, struggles to stay in front of the smaller guards that are pretty jittery. And so if you're a shooting guard, you have to be able to switch on to those guys. Like, it's just a requirement at that point. So I think that that's going to be something they have to watch. But KCP, Christian Brown, that feels like a pretty solid tandem right now. So you don't need anything too crazy at that shooting guard spot, but maybe another guy who provides a little bit of depth, and that wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. Small forward, Michael Porter Jr., Peyton Watson, Julian Strawther. This is a pretty young group. Michael Porter, the veteran of that group, and kind of an interesting thing to think about. With Jeff Green being a free agent, he's obviously not at small forward, but Bruce Brown obviously being a free agent, he played some 3 as well. Denver's got to figure it out. Christian Brown played a lot of 3 this last year, sliding over there when Bruce Brown was already out there. And that's a lineup configuration that Denver's going to have to figure out. I think that one of the things that ultimately Denver does is if they added whether it's a Bruce Brown, or let's say they traded for DeLon Wright from the Washington Wizards, somebody like that, who purely taking that out of thin air and thinking, we have no idea how that could possibly be there. But I can absolutely see a trio of Jamal Murray, DeLon Wright, and Christian Brown off the bench. Like it's not anything crazy. KCP then gets his rest. Michael Porter gets his rest, and you go with a 9-man rotation of sorts where you have 2 backcourt guys off the bench, and DeLon Wright is versatile. Christian Brown is versatile. That would work for sure. But Peyton Watson's going to get some time. Peyton Watson's going to get some opportunities for sure. He could also slide to the 4 in a lot of these different configurations. We'll have to look at the 4 in order to really talk through that. But I can see this being a pretty decent trio. I can see this being where Denver ultimately ends up. Michael Porter, Peyton Watson, Julian Strawther is not a bad trio by any stretch of the word. It does put a lot of pressure on Watson and Strawther if Michael Porter goes down with an injury. But that's kind of how it always works if you have a very top-heavy lineup, like if you have a very top-heavy roster. If Jokic goes down, obviously it's going to put a lot of pressure on the centers. If Murray goes down, it's obviously going to put a lot of pressure on the point guards. Same thing with Porter. But the good thing about bolstering at the other positions is then you can mix and match around the trio that you like, around the, especially with Murray and Jokic, like you're always going to mix and match. So I do like the idea that Porter is a very unique piece here. Peyton Watson provides the defense and Strawther provides more of the wing shooting. Porter obviously does that too. So there is something to, hey, Michael Porter goes down for a week or two. Let's say he rolls an ankle. Peyton Watson can step in and provide some solid defense. Julian Strawther steps in off the bench, gives you 10 to 15 minutes a game, hopefully. It's one of the reasons why I still think that they probably add somebody else, but you never know. You never know. Maybe this is just the group that they go with. Power forward, probably the most bolstered position now. Aaron Gordon, Vlatko Cancar, Hunter Tyson, and maybe Jack White. He's restricted free agent coming off the two-way, somebody that I still think that Denver could definitely add there. Also, Jack White could potentially slide to that small forward spot. So something to at least monitor there. Jack White actually would be a pretty good option. Like that seems like a really good idea if I'm Denver. But I do think that as long as the Nuggets as long as they have Aaron Gordon and Vlatko Cancar and Hunter Tyson, that feels pretty reasonable for their power forward spot. I've always thought that Vlatko could play. I always thought that he could play in the playoffs, and honestly, maybe had a definitely a non-0% chance that he should have played over Jeff Green in the playoffs. So Jeff will probably be back. I would still expect him to be back. I think that he provides some lineup versatility for sure, and obviously provides a veteran voice. So if he does come back to that group, then there's at least something there from a lineup perspective where if Aaron Gordon needs a break, you can go to Vlatko Cancar or you could go to Jeff Green. There's something to that for sure. I don't think you want to put Hunter Tyson in a lot of these different situations immediately, but maybe he's ready. Maybe he's ready sooner than I think. So that's something to at least consider. And then center, Nikola Jokic, Zeke Naji. That is the only two centers on the team. DeAndre Jordan, a free agent. Thomas Bryant, a free agent. Obviously, Thomas Bryant is the guy that you basically traded 3 second-round picks for this last year. So given that they did that, given that didn't work out very well, I wouldn't be surprised if Thomas Bryant was back. I know it didn't work out. I know it didn't feel great, but it just wouldn't surprise me if the Nuggets front office was like, no, we believe in the theory of the practice. We believe in that. We think that another training camp and some preseason games and some seasoning and some integration into what the Nuggets are doing, we think that Thomas Bryant could really be a fit. And that wouldn't surprise me if Denver decided to add that to this particular duo. Or they could even trade Zeke Naji. And because Zeke right now is at the center spot, he's a small ball 5, but I think a lot of people believe him as a true power forward. And if that's the case, and if you're always having to think about that in the back of your head, then maybe he's not the right guy to even have on the depth chart in the first place. He's in an expiring contract. Denver needs to figure out whether they want to pay him or not. And if you're the Nuggets and he makes a little bit more than the minimum, somebody who I think Denver had some high hopes for, but hasn't really panned out in the way that they thought he could, either they're going to give him that opportunity this year to pay out and to actually play, or they are going to trade him, or they're going to move him and try to get him to a place where he can and try to get somebody else into the rotation that they actually trust. I think that they could bring back Thomas Bryant. I think they could bring back DeAndre Jordan. They could bring back Jeff Green. And there's definitely some belief that this center spot could look very differently in the coming weeks. But we'll just have to see. Right now, it looks like this. Jokic obviously is going to play 70 to 75 games most likely. And then Zeke Naji is going to be, like, if he's out there, he'll be good. Like, he'll be a pretty helpful stretch, not even stretch 5, but like backup switchable 5. But he's also not the best option. So Denver can figure that out for sure. It'll take some time, but I do think that's something to actually monitor for sure. And finally, just a look at the free agents once again. We've got Bruce Brown, Jeff Green, DeAndre Jordan, Reggie Jackson, Ish Smith, Thomas Bryant, Colin Gillespie, and I have Thomas Bryant again. That's supposed to be Jack White. Colin Gillespie, Jack White, your restricted guys. We'll see if they actually go back. But I do think that based off of where Denver's at right now with their rotation and with their roster, they have some work to do. They still have some guys that they're going to need to add back in. Like right now, you've got let's just count it off: Jamal Murray, Jalen Pickett, KCP, Christian Brown, Michael Porter, Peyton Watson, Julian Strawther, Aaron Gordon, Vlatko Čančar, Hunter Tyson, Nikola Jokic, and Zeke Naji. Sorry, counting with my fingers is really hard. But yeah, so right now that's 12 guys out of 18 spots because Denver has 3 two-way contracts that they're going to have to fill. I don't know if Jalen Pickett's going to be one of those. I don't know if Hunter Tyson's going to be one of those. Honestly, Colin Gillespie could be back on a two-way, and Jack White could be back on a two-way if we figure that out. So we'll see what that looks like. I think Denver's going to try to fill those actual full-time spots before they really sign anybody, just to figure out what's actually the flexibility for them and then what they can actually do. Denver, obviously, the biggest priority is bringing back Bruce Brown. If you do bring back Bruce, it bolsters the backcourt rotation in very, very important ways. It allows Jamal Murray a little bit more flexibility and breathing room. It allows Michael Porter to have at least a little bit of flexibility there. And KCP, Christian Brown, I think those guys are pretty penciled into their roles, but Christian Brown would probably play just a little bit less. And maybe even KCP plays a little bit less as he gets older within his career. So going to be interesting, but I do think that the Nuggets obviously would love to have Bruce Brown back. If he's not, though, then they're going to have to figure it out, whether it's Reggie Jackson, Ish Smith, or a free agent point guard. Somebody like, I don't know, Nickeil Alexander-Walker's been thrown out there. DeLon Wright I've thrown out there, obviously. Could be Gabe Vincent. There's definitely options that Denver could go to. But that's where I'm thinking. That's where I'm thinking right now. And I think that the way that Denver added these rookies to their team, they're not going to be perfect additions immediately. They're going to take some time, but they're more offensive-minded additions, and Denver still got to figure out how to bolster that defense just a little bit more, whether it's the size in the front court, whether it's just another body in the backcourt. They're going to have to figure it out. I think that the offense will be okay. Defense, we're going to see. That's going to be another story. And Denver, especially coming off of a championship, they're going to want to take breaks. So you need defensive-minded guys that can at least stay engaged a little bit. So going to be interesting to see how they handle it. But for now, let's take another break. When we come back, we're going to talk about the rest of the draft. We're going to talk about around the league, what happened and how that affects Denver. But first, this message from our guys, Sandy and Sean.
Hi, I'm Sean Drotar. This is Sandy Clough. Make sure you catch us from 2 to 4 p.m. every day on Mile High Sports, especially now, Sandy, as the Nuggets have the best chance ever to win an NBA title.
It's basically all Nuggets all the time at the present time, but we talk all sports from 2 to 4 every day.
That's right. Every team, every day, right here at Mile High Sports.
I'm going to be on with Sandy and Sean at 3. I know that that's a relatively old advertisement that we filmed at Mile High Sports just a little bit earlier, but that's going to be a very interesting conversation. Get to talk about the draft. I get to revisit after the championship. Should be fun. Make sure to check out Sandy and Sean at Mile High Sports Radio at 3:00 today. All right. Final segment here. What the hell happened with the rest of the draft? Let's look through some of the things. Some of the stuff was surprising. Some of the stuff was unsurprising. But the most important thing I think that happened was this Brandon Miller, Scoot Henderson, Damian Lillard thing that happened. Nothing actually crazy happened. I don't think that anybody's surprised that the draft went this direction. Personally, if I was Charlotte, I would have just drafted Scoot Henderson because I think he's a way better player. I think that he's a guy that will stand out as one of your superstar types in the future. I think that he could have been the number 1 pick in a year that Victor Wembanyama was not in the draft. And Brandon Miller strikes me as you're going to have a lot to figure out with him. And he's also there's a lot of questions, I will say. And for Charlotte, who just had Miles Bridges do what he did. I'm surprised that they didn't go with the culture guy with Scoot. Like, I really think that he would have added to their team in that regard. But their loss, of course, is Portland's gain. And Scoot Henderson ends up in Portland at 3. Damian Lillard, though, had made the not ultimatum. Like, I don't know what he actually said. I don't think anybody knows what he actually said. They're just kind of projecting, of course. But Damian Lillard obviously wants to compete for a championship in Portland. I think it's his belief that another young guy added to that core is not the best way to compete for a title. And I think that that's completely fair. I think that he would want to, and the Blazers would want to trade some of the young talent that they have accumulated, add some good defenders, add some good weapons in the front court that they can really trust. And right now, it doesn't look like they have done that. We'll see what the rest of the offseason looks like for Portland, but I think that there are some major questions here. And it feels honestly ready-made for Portland to just go like, you know what? We have Scoot Henderson. We have Shaedon Sharpe. We have Anthony Simons. We have some interesting young players. And it's probably time for a rebuild anyway. So Dame, sorry, bro. Like, we know that you want to compete for a championship here. It's just not going to happen. And rather than re-signing Jeremy Grant to this big contract that he probably doesn't deserve, rather than trading for another guy, giving up a player like Scoot Henderson for, I don't know, Pascal Siakam, somebody like that, rather than trying to do that and getting to the second round of the playoffs as opposed to the first round, we are going to question the market for Damian Lillard. That would be my thinking in Portland. But I don't know. Like, it seems like Portland's they obviously want to hold on to Damian Lillard as long as possible. Dame obviously doesn't want to go. Like, he would rather stay and compete for championships in Portland. But if that's not the direction that the franchise is really going, which adding a 3rd overall pick to the 7th overall pick from last year that's still very raw, to a young Anthony Simons who is still trying to figure out how to play and doesn't really fit with Lillard that well, it's pretty reasonable to say, yeah, it's not the right time to actually compete for a title. So I think that Lillard is probably going to be traded. I don't know where he's going to be traded because not a lot of teams actually have the requisite assets to really please what Portland does. But if Dame actually comes out and says, I would like to go, that is a different conversation for what he's done over the course of these last couple of years, which is basically like, I don't know. Like, I don't know whether I'm going to actually go to other places or stay in Portland. Like, I just want to compete for a championship here, but I also want to put pressure on you. But I don't know. Like, we'll see. If you don't actually do it, then we'll see. We'll see how I feel. Like, it's just been back and forth, and it's very irritating and annoying. But I do think that this is probably where it comes to a head. Either they get the veterans that they need, or Dame is going to go. Like, that feels like everything is kind of coming to a head this summer. So maybe it doesn't. Maybe he just plays with Scoot Henderson, and we'll actually see what happens there. But it just would not surprise me if this is where it ultimately goes. Next, the Dallas Mavericks, they did some weird stuff. They traded Davis Bertans and the 10th overall pick to the OKC Thunder for the 12th overall pick, basically moving down a couple slots in order to get off of a contract for Davis Bertans. First of all, I thought that OKC, like, that was a great move for Dallas, moving down 2 spots in order to get off that contract. That seems like a pretty small price to pay in order to actually do that. But maybe OKC saw Davis Bertans as another shooter that they could use to surround their guys with. I don't know. What I do know is that Dallas, rather than waiting a little bit and trying to figure out exactly how they could use that space that they had just created, they decided, we're going to add Richaun Holmes. We are going to trade the traded player exception that we just freed up and add Richaun Holmes into that, as well as drafting Derek Lively, another center, at 12. And I don't get it. Like, I just don't. I think that Dallas is still trying to figure out how the hell they're supposed to operate. And for me, like, surrounding Luka with the best talent that you possibly can, I understand Derek Lively was a very highly regarded prospect, a center prospect. He is not ready, and maybe there's something there that he can ultimately develop into the pick and roll threat along with Luka that makes a lot of sense. But adding Rashawn Holmes into that it feels like they're not smart. It feels like another JaVale McGee signing where, yeah, you would love to have a center that makes sense as a roller, but you don't need to waste all these resources in order to do it. And now they have JaVale McGee, Rashawn Holmes, and Derek Lively, and they'll probably bring back Dwight Powell because Dwight Powell is a permanent Dallas Maverick. It's very odd. And so the way that they are running that team, it just would not surprise me if Luka is the next guy to be like, what the hell is going on here? Why am I still here? And if that's the case, and if, let's say, they lose Kyrie Irving for basically nothing, or they do a sign and trade that gets them scraps, then they're probably not going to make the playoffs again. And if that's the case, then you've got a lot of questions to answer if you miss the playoffs twice in a row with Luka Doncic in his prime. Like, there's just a lot to question. There's a lot to question about what Dallas is doing. And that this is just an outsider perspective who hasn't given it too terribly much thought, but they're a team that I thought Denver would have to compete with for titles, like just a couple of years ago. And now they're not. Now they're not even close to that. So I just don't know why they're going this direction. And I think that could be at least something to monitor for Nuggets fans that think, hey, Luka Doncic and Nikola Jokic could be a cool duo. I'm the biggest Jamal Murray guy in the world, but Luka Doncic could be really cool too. That would be pretty sweet. We'll see what ultimately turns into that. But even if it's not Luka to Denver, it could be Luka to the Lakers. And if that's the case, crap. That's just you do not want that to happen. I don't think anybody wants that to happen. So except the Lakers. The Lakers, they get everything. Next, Sacramento. They created cap space by dumping Rashawn Holmes. And I think what they're going to do here is they're going to go after a big-time free agent. They have over $30 million in cap space now in order to go out and sign somebody. They're the third overall seed in the West. Not necessarily the strongest year for the conference, but Sacramento still did what they had to do. They traded for Domantas Sabonis this last year and then continued to bolster that. They have a lot of interesting pieces. They took Golden State to 7 games and probably should have won that series if we're being honest. The fact that they didn't is dumb. But if you can add some other talented player to a trio that include that, Keegan Murray is there, he's still going to get better. De'Aaron Fox, Domantas Sabonis are awesome. They've got a lot of pieces that I think are really, really talented players, and whether they actually develop into what they need to remains to be seen. But they could be a team that had to go through one playoff round and see what they needed, and now whether they get Kyle Kuzma or I don't know. There's some other guys that they could go out and try to get. Maybe they get Brook Lopez and say, yeah, we're going to bolster our rim protection by adding another guy like this. And they could get very creative with it. So should be very interesting to see what they do. But Sacramento looks like they're going to add some cap space and maybe go after a big-time free agent or two. Cam Whitmore slid to the Houston Rockets at 20. That was one where I think a lot of people are pretty questionable when it comes to they're at least questioning what it would actually look like with his health. They did not expect him to slide to Houston. I don't think anybody expected him to slide to Houston, but I think a lot of people get burned by medicals, and then they looked at his knees and thought, yeah, this is not a really good option for us. We don't want to spend a resource on that. But Houston then gets to benefit from it if he does actually get healthy. And they draft Amen Thompson and Cam Whitmore on top of having Jalen Green, Tari Eason, Alperen Şengün, some really, really interesting young pieces that Houston is adding. And on top of that, they're probably going to try to add some vets with all the cap space that they have. So wouldn't surprise me if Houston becomes a little bit more competitive this next year. They're probably not going to win a bunch of games. That's not what the goal should be. But if they did add some veteran voices into the room to try to direct their team a little bit, then maybe Jalen Green starts to play a little bit better defense. Maybe Alperen Şengün starts to play a bit better defense. Maybe they stop turning the ball over as much and just start acting like a real basketball team again. And like having all of this talent and having a lot of versatility to be able to go with it and athleticism does kind of bolster what they could be at their ceiling. So going to take them some years for sure, but I do think that Cam Whitmore, that's a very, very interesting name. He could have gone as high as 4, and I think somebody even had him as high as 3 on one of their mock drafts or big boards. So he's a guy that getting him at 20 is a crazy thing. And you get 2 top 5 talents in the draft when you had the 20th pick. Feels pretty impressive. 2 more here before we go. This one is one that I'm going to be thinking about. I'm not going to say that I'm not going to say immediately that this is where Denver lost the draft. But if I had to quibble with the way that they approached this one, I don't think that they should have gone all offense and no athleticism, which is basically what they did. I'm going to remain open to the idea that I'm wrong because I was wrong on Christian Braun and Peyton Watson last year. Not Christian Braun. I thought that they should have drafted maybe not Ochai Agbaji. I thought they should have drafted Wendell Moore. And then with Peyton Watson, I was very confused by the pick. But that turned out, we'll see, like it could still end up being that way, but it looks like Peyton Watson could turn into somebody for Denver relatively soon. But now I'm looking at the way that Denver drafted this. They drafted Strawther at 29. They drafted Pickett at 32. And then at 37, they drafted Hunter Tyson. I see these guys, Leonard Miller, Colby Jones, Andre Jackson, and Jordan Walsh, all guys that I wrote about and thought that Denver could get in this range. They all went 33, 34, 36, 38. And when you think about that, so Denver had a chance to draft all of them. They decided not to. They decided to go with different players. They decided they wanted a different strategy, whether they thought that Leonard Miller was too raw or Andre Jackson couldn't shoot well enough or Jordan Walsh, it's hard to fit a guy like that. I don't know. I don't know what that's ultimately going to look like. And maybe Denver's proven right by that, especially when they're trying to compete over these next 2, 3, 4 years or so. You don't want to have to pigeonhole guys into roles that they're not ready for or roles that they don't really fit. And so maybe this is the right call. But if I'm thinking about the draft from a talent perspective, I'm a little bit disappointed that Denver didn't come away from the draft with one of these guys. They had the opportunity to get a Leonard Miller. They had an opportunity to get a Colby Jones or an Andre Jackson or a Jordan Walsh. Could they have gotten Jalen Pickett at 37? Probably. That I'd be shocked if they couldn't. So drafting a guy like Leonard Miller would have been a very interesting value add for a team like Denver, where you don't expect a guy like Leonard Miller to be there. He was a borderline lottery talent for a lot of people. And for him to drop all the way to 33, that's either a red flag or it's at least something where a lot of teams are thinking the same way you are. But because Denver had 3 draft picks, I thought, okay, that seems kind of odd that they didn't take a bigger swing on somebody with more potential than what they actually added. Because I see all the players that they drafted, they're older. They are older, lower potential players that are going to be good role players at the NBA level, we think, or they might not be. And if that's the case, then you really are kicking yourselves if you drafted a guy that you can't even really give a chance to. So I don't know. Going to be interesting. That's one thing that if I were to quibble on the draft, that's what I would go with. But we're going to find out. We're going to find that out together. And finally, Chris Livingston going 58th to the Milwaukee Bucks was pretty funny, and here's why. Shams throughout the evening had talked about Chris Livingston as nobody draft Chris Livingston. He has a promise. Basically he was promised that he would go to a place, and he was telling teams, stay away from me, don't draft me. I want to go to this team. I want to go to this team. I want to go to this team. And to me, it was really, really funny that the team that he wanted to go to was the last pick of the draft. Was like, hey, you really wanted to go here. I understand that it's Milwaukee. I understand you want to play with Giannis, or you think that there's a role there for you. Maybe they talked about it. And it's just objectively funny, in my opinion, that Shams went out of his way throughout the day, like weeks ago, where he was like, Chris Livington has pulled out of workouts in order to get to the 58th pick of the draft, the final pick of the draft, which that's just pretty funny to me. But here's like, who knows? Like maybe it works out for him. Maybe he becomes the next great second round pick. And if that's the case, then more power to him. But I just thought it was pretty funny. All right, folks, I think that is going to do it for our draft coverage wrap up here. Going to have a lot more to give on the draft coverage side. There will be some talks on Monday. I think they're going to do interviews. Calvin Booth is going to speak to all of the media on that front, as well as each of the players. We'll get to know them. I'll definitely do a podcast after that. But for now, Michael, can you hit that outro music for me? Everybody, that is going to do it for this episode of Pickaxe and Roll, brought to you by our good friends over at Superbook Sports. Thank you so much for tuning in. I appreciate everybody for hanging out. I know that some folks probably wanted to do post-game cover or post-draft coverage last night, but I got back pretty late, wanted to put out a big article. I wrote close to 2,000 words on where Denver stands on the rest of this offseason as well. So if you want this podcast in written form, go over to milehighsports.com and you can read up on all of these players and where Denver stands. Should be good. Thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in. Appreciate all the love and support on the podcast as always. We'll talk to you guys very soon.